Forsyth at Royal Melbourne Golf Club in Australia. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning, Micah. This is great. We're just admiring the technology and how clear we're coming through. So it's like you're in the next room.
Yeah, it is remarkable, and I love being able to have these conversations with turfgrass managers and scientists from around the world. And I am especially excited to talk with you because Royal Melbourne Golf Club is famous. I would say it's world renowned for having fast and firm playing surfaces and putting greens in particular. And I recall when I played there in 2011, I was hitting some wedge shots, and at the time, I would have considered myself. I would have been an 8 handicap player or something like that, 10 handicap, but I was pretty good with wedges, and I would hit these wedges at a nice trajectory and a good amount of spin for the way that I play, and they would land in the middle of the green, and then they would bounce like I'd never experienced before. And I've played golf in Scotland and in England and all around the world. I hadn't ever really had balls react like that, where and so then it finishes 10 yards or 15 yards off the back of the green. And I'm like, whoa, I need to reevaluate how I'm playing. So it was a level of firmness that I had never experienced before. And this is such a hot topic about how to achieve that. And I wanted to talk with you about how you achieve that, and whether it's by the grass type or the sand type or the way you manage. So let's enjoy a conversation today about that. And maybe to get started, is it, am I right in that Royal Melbourne is renowned for those types of surfaces?
Probably not today. We've just had about 50 millimetres of rain over 4 days. But look, generally that's, and certainly it's my goal to, it's not so much firmness, but I just like to see the ball bounce forward when it lands. So that's that's something that we really pride ourselves on and work hard on. And I have a few people say to me, "Oh, I haven't repaired a pitch mark here in 5 years or 10 years." That's not quite true. Certainly after rain, as I said, we can get some pitch marks, but rarely we would have broken turf type pitch marks. We certainly have indentations at the moment, as I said, after rain. But yeah, the goal is to see the ball, regardless of where it lands, whether it's a low drainage point at the front or it's a higher bunker edge. We want to see the ball bounce forward when it lands. And so to achieve that, there's a few things involved, but the makeup of the sand, our grass type, the way we manage it, all those, certainly our watering irrigation program, they're all part of the recipe. But yeah, it's definitely a goal that we have to try and have bouncy surfaces.
That I was reading some articles about or they were published around the time of the 2019 President's Cup, and the you know they there were just rave reviews of the playability coming from people such as Tiger Woods, just saying how this is how a golf course should be set up. So and there were also some articles that said this is not too different from the way the members play the course in terms of firmness, and it's something that was providing playability that could challenge the best players in the world, and it also was suitable for member play. And
yeah, so I think that's the key. The key thing for the course still to be relevant for the best players is that firmness, because it's certainly quite short by modern day standards for that level of play. And so if you didn't have the firmness, you would just throwing darts at the greens, it wouldn't be you wouldn't see the true strategy and the benefit of angles and those things that come into play. But even with a short club in their hand, if it's firm and bouncy, then that's just another element. So some greens have the firmer it gets and the speedier it gets, the actual landing area to put you near the pin becomes very small, and so the emphasis on accuracy becomes quite high. So and angles and things as well. So I think by keeping the firmness there, it keeps the course relevant for that level of play. And so we always say to the members, it's not a dial setting. If you're out with the goal to have firmness, you can't always just simply dial that back for the women's competition on Wednesday and then dial it up for the President's Cup on Saturday. So if you're chasing firmness, they're going to be overly firm at times, and I think generally our members accept that and adjust to it. But it's definitely a goal, and that's what we try to do. We're very fortunate at the President's Cup that we had some cooler, dry conditions. It was quite dry in the month leading up to and during the event itself, and cool conditions, so very little irrigation needed, and everything dried down really well, and we were able to get that sort of consistent bouncy turf. We actually enjoy seeing the ball bounce waist height when it lands. It's terrific.
Yeah, I imagine. So when you assess firmness, do you just do that by watching shots land on the green and perhaps throwing a ball down and just seeing how far it bounces up? You don't really use a Clegg on a day-to-day basis, do you?
No, we don't. We don't have a Clegg, but for me, it's just bouncing a ball on the turf, watching how it plays. That's really as scientific as we get. We have done Clegg, and we've used the USGA True Firm just at tournament time when we had access to that. But generally it's just throwing a ball onto the surface and seeing making sure it does bounce back.
I want to start with some of the stuff that might be unexpected to people. I understand in America and in many parts of the world, it would be common to think that sand top dressing is going to lead to firmer conditions. And so getting out as much sand as possible, as frequently as possible, is thought of as an idea to manage and maintain firmness. So I would like to ask you now, at this golf club that's renowned for firmness and you want the ball to bounce forward, how frequently do you sand top dress?
These days, once or twice a year.
Okay, very good answer. So that's not the mainstream, but it obviously works. So when do you top dress? If those one or two times?
So that's evolved. I've been here nearly 14 years now, and that's evolved over time. So I used to be on that thought process as well, as frequent sanding was important to maintain the firmness. But the problem was that we had such a lean fertility program. Then it's you putting sand on it just never disappeared. It was always on the surface. So you were dealing with it for the next weeks afterwards. So and that sort of forced our hand a little bit to sort of back away from the actual regular sanding. And so it just evolved that really we didn't see any detriment to the firmness by doing less top dressing. And so it's sort of evolved back to where we are now, and we're only putting it on very very occasionally, and sometimes it's it's not even once a year. It's just maybe in spring, just to try and level things up a little bit, smooth things out, fine down the leaf. But then we do deal with that sand for quite a while. So yeah, it's evolved into that, and without measuring scientifically anything, we haven't seen that the firmness has dropped away by dropping away our sanding program.
That is fascinating. And for regular readers of the ATC blog, or people who have listened to some of my seminars, or perhaps some other of these ATC office hour episodes, this is something that I've kind of discovered by accident also, with some measurements over time at some different golf courses, and just coming to realize that when you don't top dress, it doesn't necessarily, as long as the growth rate is not out of control, it can actually enhance firmness because you're also generally not punching holes that loosen the surface. And when we think about core aerification and solid tine aerification, those are often done to open up the surface in order to get more sand down into the profile. But the problem is, when we think about that those also decompact the surface. And so the problem is, that's kind of, if you're trying to make it firmer and you're decompacting the surface in an attempt to get more sand down, it's kind of counterproductive. And so just by skipping that type of aerification, and it allows you to also not put sand and still maintain your firmness. So it's not the typical way that I used to teach about this, or the way that the textbooks generally recommend, but it's something that seems to be effective at some different places around the world.
One of the things that I recognised when I first came here was that the previous management regime had been to top dress with purchased sand, which was somewhat washed, uniform type sand, and that layer had built up in the top layer of the greens here, and it was a whiter type material, droutier, and it was sitting over the natural grey dune sands here, which were they just looked better for growing turf. And prior to that, Claude Crockford, who was the course manager here for 40 years, from 35 to 1975, he always sourced his top dressing material from the golf course property. So he went off into the bushland and sort of mined sand out of areas, and he used that material for his top dressing program. And we got to a point where that seemed to be exhausted, and there was not opportunities to go and harvest more of that material. So then sand started to be imported, and it was nowhere near the same characteristics of the sand that we have here on site. So it went from a broad particle distribution to a sort of a subangular type sand to a more uniform, rounded, washed sand with less silt and clay in it. So and I recognised that was changing the character of the greens. And when I started here, we stripped all that material off and reseeded the greens back into what was the natural profile. Then we went on a program of where could we harvest that sand from again on the golf course, and we managed to find some areas. And then we built some water storages, and we were able to get quite a volume of sand from on site. We invested in our own sieves, and that's the sand that we've used ever since for any top dressing.
Which now that you've got the sand back to the original in the profile, it sounds like you don't have to top dress so often anyway.
Yeah, and we certainly don't do any core aerification. So we haven't done that in 14 years. So we don't open the surface up for that, for that reason. Well, one of the reasons we don't do that is for poa annua as well, just to try and minimise any openings for that to get established. But it also helps, I think, keep firmness by not punching holes in the surface.
So you don't solid tine or core aerify, but you do a certain type of aerification, don't you?
Yes. So we use the Toro Hydroject machine, and over the years they're not available to buy new anymore, but over the years we've accumulated multiple of those machines, and just in the last 2 days we've been out and hydrojected the whole 36 holes in 2 days with the fleet of hydrojects. But that's the only form of cultivation that we do.
Nice. So that helps keep the POA down. That's a nice transition to grass. So the grass there is Sutton's mix, which is grown in New Zealand on the South Island, and it's custom grown for your club, I understand. And then that's a mix of brown top and creeping bent grasses. Does it have both species in there?
We think it's predominantly brown top colonial bent grass these days. The greens that were sown in 1930, 2930, the original greens were, as I understand, were the South German bent grass mixtures, which were pretty common at the time, and they were put in here in the both courses at that time. And then Crockford again, managed those greens for 40 years, and he kept the POA at bay by using some old type techniques, including lead arsenate and other things, and was able to keep them fairly clean for that period. And then again, change of management, and some greens were changed over to Pencross, or all the composite greens actually were changed over to Pencross in the 80s, early 80s, and then perhaps there was people recognised that they weren't the quality of putting surfaces that they had previously, and that program was stopped, and the club and the superintendent at the time, Jim Porter, they went on a program of how could they recreate what was in the remaining 18 greens. And that was the original mixture that was provided by the Sutton Seed Company. So there was some work done with Keith Salisbury at PGG in New Zealand, and they took plugs out of the better looking colonised patches at the time, and then grew those out, and then the seed from those was then used to establish a seed field, and then that's harvested and comes back to us as our current seed mixture. So that's a brief story of how it's evolved.
Well, thank you. That's fascinating, and there's not many golf courses in the world that have such an interesting story about the grass on the greens. And do you interseed with that? Do you maintain a big nursery of that? How do you make use of that seed? And then I know there's that famous method of thatch control, or organic, let's say organic matter management, because if the grass is growing, it's still producing organic matter. You're not top dressing much. You're not removing it by core aerification or anything. So how do you make use of the seed in your organic matter management?
Yeah, so seeding's really mainly for the greens nursery area, and then recently there was a redevelopment done at the Sandringham public golf course across the road from us here, and we manage that site, which has an 18-hole golf course and driving range area and a high performance development area for Golf Australia there. So we chose in the redevelopment to reseed those greens with the Suttons mix as well. So we used quite a bit of seed there. So that's so now we have sort of 64 Suttons mix greens, but we have a nursery where from time to time, where we do repairs and things, we reseed a section of that. So that's probably the only place we're really using seed on a regular basis now is in our greens nursery re-establishment.
Okay, so you're not really doing any interseeding at all.
Well, we have on occasions if we've thinned out turf a little too much or have some problem areas, we would put down some seed, but it's not a regular program, no.
So how often do you do the sod lifting and then scraping off the organic layer that's developed and then putting that sod back down? And how do you add extra sand, or you just put it straight down on the existing material?
So again, this is another concept that's developed from Claude Crockford's days, and he, as I said, he had the greens for 40 years, but in the middle of that 40 years, he went through and he would go through and lift the turf and put it aside, remove the build-up of organic material, and then put that turf back down. And then when after his time, then the program to start to change to the Pencross happened, and then the re-establishment back to the Suttons mix. So there wasn't a period of years long enough for anyone really to sort of consider that program as being required. And during that period, they went back to a coring program and sort of traditional twice a year and top dressing program. And then when I started, we stripped the top off and went back to as I said, to get back onto the native sand underneath. And then that was 14 years ago. And since then, we've done pretty much all the composite holes again by stripping the existing turf off, stripping out the organic material, and putting that turf back down again. So around about that 10 to 15 year mark, we think is the timing to do that. So that's what we try to factor in. But yeah, some of the greens on the non-composite holes are due because they're in that sort of 14-year window, but we're just not tackling those at the moment. We need to in the next few years.
Oh, okay. For those joining us live, we can show some pictures of this because you provided me some pictures of this process, Richard. And I know some people are going to be listening to this later, and so we'll try to describe what we show. But is it okay if I bring up these pictures and show some of that sodding process? And I think the chat's going to disappear off the screen because I'm going to show this on the full screen. So I'll say hello to Neville from Laos. We got a very global audience. Ahmad from Batam, Indonesia. Anthony from Texas. Nick from Western Australia. We've got Matthew from Sydney. Warwick, Hill, Rennie. John, probably from the USA. So thanks everybody for joining us live. Let's see. I can bring up these pictures. So you start off some history from the club, grading a golf bunker with a horse and a drawn scraper.
I think the reason I put that in there was just to explain to people that both golf courses were constructed via a horse and scoop. So there wasn't a lot of earth moving went on when the courses were established. And you can see that was a newspaper article dated 1931. So that was during the construction of the golf courses. And then as a reminder of that, we have the horse-drawn scoop and plough located in the front driveway in that picture on the right, just to celebrate that fact that the skill of the architecture and the construction was pretty good when you consider the tools that they were using.
And yet, did you said Claude Crockford was there for 40 years?
Yes.
What was his tenure, start and end times? Just when you're referring to when he was there, what years was that?
1935 to 1975.
To 1975. Okay, so he was there, and the club was constructed 1929-30. You said?
Yes.
Okay, so he was there, and was it Alex Russell that helped with the construction? Is that the name that is coming to mind?
So Mick Morecambe was the greenkeeper, the head greenkeeper at the time, and he was involved in the construction of both courses.
Okay.
And Mick unfortunately passed away, and then the reins were handed to Claude in 1935.
Okay. And the next image that we're looking at shows a sod cutter, a small sod cutter, 18 inches, I presume, cutting a very thin slice of turf.
That would be a 12-inch
12
blade there, yeah. So we've tried both. We can do it with both, but we find that when we're cutting the turf so thin that the wider blade sort of can distort and buckle, and you get some unevenness in the turf. So the narrower blade we've found to be better, and you can see, people can see that, but the turf is quite thin. We work on trying to cut it as just to take it the least amount of organic material with the turf that we can when we do that.
Right. So that's kind of by feel, and you're just trying to get the thinnest slice possible.
Yeah. So it gets to the point where if you're going on a slight uphill or a slight downhill, that will change how the blade cuts the turf. So getting the direction and going one direction only is quite important when you're trying to be that accurate as well, because going slightly uphill or downhill can change the thickness of the turf quite significantly.
And then that turf is going to be put back down.
Yes.
That seems like a nerve-wracking job to do. I can imagine, taking a sod cutting machine and being the operator of that, going across, some world famous greens with world renowned turf. That you must put some skilled operators on that.
Well, we've had different people all through the years, and the techniques handed on to others as we go. But yes, it's it is a bit daunting when you first run the first line through a green. And then that photo sort of shows the how the sod comes up in that sort of nice thin sort of layer. And the photo on the left is just that we do pre-cut with cross cuts using an atom edger just to cut some lines across, and then we run our sod cuts at right angles to that, so that all the joins then are nice and square and come up evenly. So that's an important part of the process as well.
Yeah, so you pre-cut pre-cut with the edger, and then you run the sod cutter at 90-degree angle to that, so you get really nice pieces that come up. And let's see. I was going to ask, you don't mark this at all. I don't see any marks on the sod, so you just put it back down in a different pattern than it was picked up, right?
Yes. In Crockford's days, they actually laid what was sort of a tram track type configuration, where they would lay the long runs at 6 feet apart and then block the pieces in between those runs. And so the theory of that was that it all tied in together and locked in and knitted in. Of course, that turf was much more colonised and had quite large colonised patches of different textured turf. So that would look a little checkerboard for some time, whereas ours is starting to get, after 14 years, starting to colonise into those sort of patches. But generally we lay the green, and sort of within, I'm going to say 3 months, but probably a year, you don't see the different textures of the colonised, what is the smaller colonised patches these days. So it ties in very well after a period of time.
And now there's a picture that shows the sod cutter. So now the grass has been removed and the sod cutter's going over again, cutting chunks of organic matter sod, and it's cutting down, it looks like an inch or an inch and a half or something, and then people are moving that with these chunks of organic matter they are removing with a shovel.
Yeah, so to establish the depth of that, we usually just take a few little squares out and sort of look at the how much, or find where we think it's back to sand, and then we set the sod cutter at that depth. When we originally did the greens, there was, greens that have been down for a number of years, there's a need to sometimes do 2 cuts to get all of that material away. So yes, it just depends on how much is accumulated, how many years of growth you've got there, as to where you can where you would set your depth of your sod cut.
And that material it's not thatch. You wouldn't. It still has a lot of sand mixed in there with the organic matter, doesn't it?
Well, since we've, our reduced top dressings, you know, a lot of it is organic matter. I wouldn't put a percentage on it, but yeah, a lot of it is organic matter. I don't know if you can pick up on the picture on the left, but you can sort of see the hydroject holes poking up through the.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I see those.
One of the things that the hydroject does, when it jets the water down, it actually displaces sand, and some of that sand, depending on the moisture in the green, or I suppose the efficiency of the particular machine we're using, it'll blast a bit of sand back up into that surface area as well. So it's probably only small, but we are getting some amelioration of the organic matter by the sand from the hydroject. You can actually see the holes quite clearly through that. Micah, I can't hear you.
Oh my goodness.
Now we're good.
I'm so sorry. My computer locked up and just completely froze, and I hope that doesn't happen again. And then I was able to restart it. I'm so sorry about that. Sorry to disappear like that, Richard.
Well, I didn't do very well, Micah, because I just stopped. I didn't keep going without you.
Well, that's fine. For everybody who stuck with us live, I appreciate that, and we will continue this conversation. And hopefully, my computer does not lock up again. That was crazy. So anyway, you show the interesting photo, and there's these little pockets of clean sand that are appearing through the organic matter layer at the top of it. So that's an intriguing phenomenon to actually top dress in low rates from below by blasting the hydrojet down into the sandy layer, and then it comes back up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not going to claim it as a really a beneficial method, but that's you can see that's what happens, and it doesn't always happen every time you do it. It's just certain conditions you get that nice um, amelioration of the sand coming back to the surface. So
Yeah, that's cool. So you 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 strip off that organic layer and take it away, and then after that, well, here we've got a picture of a golf ball. So it's about a golf ball height on this particular
Mhm.
green of that
Yes.
organic layer, and you're just getting down to the sand now. For We hear about the Melbourne sand belt, and so I presume this is like dunes from the ocean. Could you describe like what this sand is, this original material?
I suppose location-wise, we're a kilometre and a half from the bay, the beach, and the ground that a lot of the golf courses covers is sort of dune formation, and that the sand is a sort of a dark grey in colour, and it varies a little bit. The um, higher and drier areas can be a sort of a more a coarser material, and then the lower lying areas can be siltier, darker material. So each green is really, and the point of showing that picture about the horse and scoop is that the greens were constructed virtually in the location they're in. So the soil types surrounding are what the greens are constructed out of. So, a higher and drier area might be a droutier sand than a sort of a lower lying area. So there is some variation there, but you don't really, in terms of managing them, there's a little difference, but not a massive difference. But certainly the sands of the local area have an impact on the behaviour of the green. But the sand is, and I think you've looked at a test of our sand stockpile, fairly broad particle distribution, finer than say USGA sand, I think,
Mm-hmm.
more silt and clay, subangular, so locking together type particles, and that can get very tight, that sand. And so you talk about infiltration rates. You add the turf and the organic matter infiltration in the field are sort of down in under 5, in the low 2 or 3 millimeters. So most of our drainage is really surface runoff.
Yes. You mentioned that you'd listened to Chris Trittabaw's recent podcast with Doug Soldat, and I listened to that also, and they were talking about green construction methods and sand selection and drainage and firmness and so on. And one of the questions, or the question that Chris ended that discussion with, he asked Doug how Doug would build a green if he had to build one. And Doug talked about variable depth sands and still having a gravel layer and so on. And Chris talked about, I think, using a no gravel layer, but having a drainage system of pipes down there to catch the water. And neither of them mentioned surface drainage. But the thing that I would have answered that question by saying, I would build a green by using local materials and having really good surface drainage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that if you have internal lows in greens, where water is draining to somewhere inside the green instead of draining off of it, I don't care what your infiltration rate is, how good of a sand you have, how good of a drainage system you have underneath. When you get hot and humid weather, or maybe if you get cold and frozen weather, those are always the areas that have problems, those internal lows. And I really like good surface drainage to move the water off. Instead of relying on water to go down, I like water to move off.
Yeah, and you see that here. There's quite a lot of slope in the greens at Royal Melbourne, so the water does spill off quite efficiently and quickly. So, you can, in a rain event, you'll see water accumulate on the surface, but it's generally moving, and in 10 minutes after the rain stops, a lot of the water's gone, and that's really it's surface movement, surface drainage.
Do you have internal lows on the greens where the water can puddle?
A few, not many, but yeah, there are a few spots, and that the water can sit there. But again, you do some hydrojecting, and you'll find that sort of those areas will percolate through a bit quicker after you do that. But yeah, we have to maybe squeegee the odd spot off here and there.
Yeah. So yeah, you did share the sand particle size analysis with me, and thank you for that. It's very interesting. I've been doing a project collecting as many of those results as I can, trying to understand more about what type of sand particle size distributions tend to work well and which have been problematic, which ones people find provide a firm surface and which ones people find don't quite firm up. And I looked at those data that you sent me, and I calculated the coefficient of uniformity, which is how widely graded the sand is, which means are all the particles close to the same size, or do you have a mix of small particles and medium-sized particles and larger particles? And if you have like marbles in a pint glass, and all the marbles are the same size, there's going to be big gaps between them. So that would be what would be called a narrowly graded or a poorly graded sand or material, in when it's all the same size. And those kind of surfaces would tend not to firm up. But if you take those marbles and then you mix it with finer materials, such as silt and clay and finer sand, now you've got a mix of medium and big and small sizes, and all of a sudden the pore spaces starts to go away and that material can firm up. And so the coefficient of uniformity is a way to assess this and just put a single number to how narrowly graded or how widely graded the sand is. Narrowly graded, if I'm using the right terminology, narrowly graded would be everything's the same, closer to the same size, and widely graded would be a mix of different sizes. And if I remember correctly, the United States Golf Association recommendations for a method of putting green construction recommend a number, a CU value, a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 3.5, if I remember. And I calculated that for your sand, and it was about 4.2. So for people who are familiar with that CU number, the coefficient of uniformity applied to a sand particle size distribution, you're definitely on the higher end, and that means that sand should fit together pretty well and form a pretty tight surface, which could lead to some of that excellent firmness. And of course, you want to make sure that you don't then have too much organic matter sitting on top of that sand. That sand has the potential and the ability to form a nice firm surface, and you want to keep that organic matter from distorting that. So you've got this no coring, minimal top dressing. Just let the organic matter build up until you decide it needs to get taken away. And then you strip off the grass. Then underneath that, you're stripping off the organic matter. And then you just lay the grass right back down on the original sand belt sand.
That's right. So I think just on that sand particle shape and sizing, I think that was a good comment. I think in Chris and Doug's session there, they were talking about 3/4 minus road base and how that all fits together and compacts nicely. And I thought that's not a bad analogy to the broad particle sizes of the sand and how it all sort of locks together and creates that firmness. But
yeah, that's a good point. And I think the question that I don't know how to answer, and I don't know who knows how to answer it, but at some point the sand fits together so well and it compacts so well that the roots won't penetrate and you can't grow grass in it. And the grass would just grow in cracks in the soil, but it wouldn't grow in the soil as a whole. And clearly, with the sand that you have, it's possible to grow grass. Do you notice that that the roots seem to reach a layer or something where they just can't penetrate anymore? Or what are the roots like on those greens?
the roots are concentrated in the hydroject holes.
Okay.
So, which indicates, they want to grow down that sort of loose, fresh sand. And the nice thing about a hydroject is that it blasts a hole that's sort of rough on the sides, and then at the bottom it sort of explodes out, and you get this sort of hollow down and then a broader hole at the bottom. So that ideal for and in summer, or certainly in spring when it's drier and you put a bit of moisture down there via the hydroject, they really do seem to follow that void down pretty well. So a lot of the roots are concentrated in that area, which would indicate what you're saying. The tightness of the sand perhaps restricts the root, and then you add the compaction and the rolling and all the things that we do. It even tightens it up more. So.
Yeah, I think it's a challenging one because you need to grow grass, so you need to have pore space and you need to have the soil with a low enough compaction so that the roots can actually penetrate it. But we're also trying to do a sporting surface that has particular characteristics. So it's like cricket wickets, right? Those get rolled to the point where you couldn't grow grass in it, but they grow grass. Am I correct in that they grow the grass in it at a lower compaction level, and then they roll and roll and roll and roll to compact those wickets for playability, and probably the grass wouldn't grow anymore after it's been compacted? Do you know about cricket wickets?
I haven't actually dealt with wickets too much, but so I think that the clays do tend to crack open as they dry. So a lot of the root growth would be down the cracking in the clay. But yes, once it's being rolled and rolled and rolled, it wouldn't be that conducive to growing good turf, I wouldn't think. But they crack and open up, when they're taken out of play, and then the roots would go down those cracks, I imagine.
We've got a question here from Nick. He says, "What's the machine on the left?" And there are pictures on the screen now showing the surface smoothing, I think. So could you explain what's going on here?
So once the organic layer's taken away, we do run that is a Graydon scarifier, Nick. Good pickup. So we just run that machine through sometimes a couple of different directions just to loosen up that surface and give, for the roots from the turf, a good start to bind into the sand. So that's a Graydon scarifier, and then that's sort of smoothed over both with a synthetic drag mat and or just our hand work there on the right with the guys boarding that out with a smooth board to get the levels back. Of course, we don't take any or record any levels when we do this. We're relying on the fact that we're taking the material away in definite layers, and then therefore the contours aren't being changed. So, and the other interesting point is that we don't add new sand back into that. We would generally strip the turf beyond the green when we have a fine fescue grass in our surround. Strip it beyond the green and then sort of marry that back down. And again, the theory is what this enables us to do is over time that green surface builds up from its original height. By doing this process, we believe that we're maintaining the green surface at its original height, and so therefore bunker depths and things like that are less affected over time, because we're taking away that build up each time that we strip the surface off. So that's another advantage, and it also allows us at that time to adjust what we think is sand splash or wind blow of bunker sand from the bunkers, and then so all that sort of work is done at that time, which is definitely an advantage.
Do you get a lot of sand splash with those bunkers that are right next to the putting surface? You've got putting surface that goes right to the bunker edge, don't you?
That's
on
right.
Some holes.
Yeah. So and wind blow as well, because the bunkers are quite large, and then you can get strong, particularly northerly winds where the sand will blow up onto the green surface, and also the sand splash from play as well, especially in the bunkers that are, say, right at the front of the green where it's high intensity of play. There's a fair bit of sand shoveled out of those daily. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Anthony's got a question that I think you answered. You said you don't shoot any grades. He's asking about that. Can you confirm?
No, that's right. So we're just stripping off at the layer of the sod cutter, and then putting it back down. So no, we have recorded levels, but we don't use that in this application, because it's a fairly precise layer that we take away.
This might be a good time to answer John's question from earlier, because we're showing the sod going back down, the original sod going back down on the now pure sand surface. And John asked if you'd ever consider establishing the newest varieties of bentgrass.
Now this is an interesting question. It gets posed here from time to time because changing climatic conditions. We're finding in Melbourne we're probably getting a little more humid all the time, and the brown top doesn't enjoy the humidity, and so at times people are suggesting, should we be looking at some of the more modern bent grasses. My view is that could potentially change the character of the green, just by the way the creeping bents, for instance, grow and accumulate organic matter, whereas the brown top, is an upright grower and slow grower, so there's not the same rate of accumulation in organic matter. And again, I've got nothing to prove this scientifically, but the type of organic matter produced by that Sutton's mix, for whatever reason, seems to be conducive to maintaining firmness. Whereas if I put a newer type creeping bent on there and we tried to manage it the same way and didn't top dress and things, I'm sure that would get quite soft and maintain high level of moisture in it in time. But definitely the Sutton's mix, the firmness of the green surface has something to do with the grass type itself, and perhaps its growth rate and the way it produces organic matter. Again, I've got nothing scientific to confirm that, but that's what I see and what I believe is the case. And even if it was a power green, the organic matter created would be much softer and lot more. The Sutton's mix is more resilient to the ball when it lands, and sort of whereas if it was a power surface, it would break the surface and dig in, whereas the Sutton's mix tends to repel and reject the ball more. So, I'd love to do some more investigation of that and see if we could actually prove that. But that's what we seem to believe. So, no, I would not at this stage consider recommending to the club that we change the greens to a more modern grass. And the other thing about it, I think, is it's quite unique. We've basically recreated a version of the grass that was seeded originally back in the late 20s and 30s, and it's grown exclusively for us, and just probably sets the character of the greens here apart from the clubs around us that would have newer bent grasses and even power greens. So it's quite a unique, and the way the whole package behaves with the sand and the grass, I think be a brave person to recommend to change that. But I might be proven wrong in the long term, but I think the package is important to the character of the greens and the way they play.
Thank you for that. Eamon McCarthy has a question that I have also. So he asks how many greens get completed at one time. Is this something where you come in and do 3 greens all in one time? And I'll also ask how much time does it take from the time you start cutting the sod off a green until the grass is put down? That's another question.
Yes, well, so these days with the fine fescue apron and surround, we include that in the process as well, because we want the sort of the 20-metre apron at the front of the green to bounce and react the same way as it does if you land on the green. So we include that in the stripping process. So that can increase double the area of the green. So if our green is 700 or 800 square metres, we've got at least that of fescue to lift as well and go through that process. So if we were just doing greens, we could easily do two a week. But when you cut the turf that thin, you want to get it back down as quickly as you can. So generally, if it was just the green, we'd strip that one day, prepare the next, and be laying it day 3 back down. So it can be quite quick, and the quicker you do it, the better it is for the turf, and the time of year we do that as well. It's not easy to do it in summer when you've got hot temperatures and drying. That sod will dry out very quickly. It's almost like managing washed sod, because you just don't have any resistance there when there's no roots on it to any moisture stress. So we generally do it sort of end of winter, early spring is our ideal timing. So we would probably these days try and do 1 hole a week would be our conservative way, but we could do 2, but generally be 1 hole per week. But that's sort of often 1,800 or 2,000 square metres of turf to lift, strip out that much organic matter, and then relay the turf.
And after the turf has been relaid, when does the green or the hole reopen for play?
Generally, it's a 3-week turnaround, 3 to 4 weeks. Again, if you do it early spring and you've got growth on your side, you want to get roots back down, and then some top dressing sand on there. But my theory has always been a balance between what's best for the turf and what's best for the members, and so you wouldn't get to do this. If we if it was a 3-month process, we wouldn't get to do it as often as we would like, because people wouldn't tolerate it. But my argument is always that we don't have any downtime from a coring or top dressing point of view. So to go every 10 to 15 years and take a green out of play for 4 weeks is more palatable than coring it twice a year and sanding it and having perhaps 10 weeks of substandard surfaces. So that's always been my argument. So people are on board with that. But I think what we're talking about previously, Michael, was also the greens don't really get their character back for multiple years until the root system really gets established again. And it's that discussion about what impact does the turf and the roots play on the firmness aspect. And again, using Chris and Doug's comment about the roots being like the rebar of the engineering or the construction is pretty true. When we put that turf back down, and you can imagine it's very thin and there's not a lot of roots, it doesn't really get its mojo back for at least, we think, year 3 afterwards. I mean, it's firm and it's hard to walk on, but in terms of the ball reaction on it, it doesn't bounce. It's sort of it's almost like a tennis ball scenario. It hits and will stop quickly. Whereas if you get once you've got the roots as part of the program, then you'll start to get the bounce and you'll get the more we perceive as more firmness. So the roots and the grass type really have a impact on that. So even though we do it, the green's probably not back to playing the way we'd like it to play for at least 2 years, probably 3.
I think it's really fascinating how that is. Just this whole firmness topic is one that a lot of people talk about, and yet listening to what you're doing, and you're saying it takes 3 years of grass growth and actually organic matter production and the roots kind of binding everything together to achieve the even firmer surfaces than if you're just on the pure sand immediately. The lack of coring, the lack of solid tine aeration, the almost shockingly low amount of sand top dressing. These are all atypical things. And I know in Australia, it's common to do something which is called a annual renovation, right? Where Americans might call it a intensive cultivation or something, where you would scarify and core and top dress and so on, and really disrupt the surfaces pretty intensely for a week or two. And that would be the main event for the year for organic matter management. But it's done annually. Is that a typical Australian way to manage, to do an annual renovation?
Yes, although that I think that's been, it's less of a mandatory thing these days. I think there's plenty of superintendents and clubs, doing alternatives such as verti drain, solid, and then top dress. But traditionally it's been that core and or scarify type scenario, but definitely a trend to less of that in the last 10 or 15 years, where there's plenty, as I said, plenty of clubs that don't put a coring machine near their green. They might use a solid, as I said, solid tine aerification. Not too many just doing hydroject, as I understand, but
yeah. That it's nice that you have so many of those machines. I'll show a picture that you also shared with me. How many working hydrojects do you have in your shop?
But I don't want to show off, so
You don't have, yeah.
I was going to say enough, but no, the answer is 10.
Oh, nice. That's nice.
And we've procured them from all around the world. People have got to know, and perhaps if there's anyone listening who has one in the corner of their facility, they might want to dust it off and go and use it now. That's the only problem. If anyone has a surplus hydroject, I'd be interested to hear from them. So
yeah,
but yes, look, they do. They're a bit high maintenance, and parts are getting harder to source. So the concept was buy up, or people have even given them to us, but get a few so that you can then start to swap parts around and sort of keep them operating that way. But at the moment, we've got 10 that do. So we can set, because they are slow and you've got the hose and it's a bit cumbersome. See, that photo on the left is, I think, showing sand coming to the surface there. Yep. from the process. So a bit of interruption to the golf when you're doing that. So having multiple machines to sort of go out, put 6 or 8 or so out, early in the morning, you can get the first lot of greens done before the golfers get there, and then sort of work through the course that way. And you can sort of, whereas if you had 1 or 2 machines, it's a multiple day scenario where we can certainly do 1 course in a day quite comfortably with multiple machines.
Did you say how often you tend to do the hydrojecting?
Well, we'd like to do it more often, probably, but it's a time thing. I'm going to say we probably do 6 or 8 times a year.
Okay, and then the roots are predominantly in those hydroject holes.
Yeah, I don't think I shared a photo of that, but there is a good photo of, and I don't think it's in the ones I sent you, but yeah, you pull out a plug, and we're all familiar with the ones where you do a new green, you've got this great root system, but we pull our plug out and you see the roots poking out the bottom of the hydroject holes, generally more than a mass of roots through the whole profile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean that may be why the USGA recommendations are for a maximum CU of 3.5, because maybe beyond that, the medium just compacts so much that the roots don't want to grow in it. It could be. Yeah. This is something that I'm still studying and learning about.
Well, the old days, there was plenty of soil based greens where greens were constructed on a soil that would be even tighter and compact more than our sand. So grass has been able to grow in those environments.
So the soil will, as you mentioned about the cricket wickets, that clay, when it dries, it will crack. So you would get some fractures. I mean, there's such a balance between growing grass and having enough aeration in the soil and enough decompacted areas in the soil for the grass to grow, that can be unique to each type of soil. Well, we have a few more questions. Let's see. Nick asks, at that 3-year stage, when you're saying you're really having the greens to have their mojo back, what depth on average would the roots be?
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer that accurately. I'd say around 100 mil, 4 inches.
4 inches. And let's see, Chris Tridabaugh says that he has a hydroject, but you can't have it. So that's a nice. Well, thanks, Chris. Yeah,
But then he says we can work out a deal. I wonder what that means.
yeah. I don't know what that means, but yeah, I don't know. He's close to the Toro headquarters. Maybe he could encourage them to make that machine again. I know there those are a very popular machine for being very effective. And really, I don't know that there's a machine out there that can accomplish quite the same result.
We
So,
did. Well, perhaps Chris means that the deal might be that he could bring it with him in his carry-on. He could come out for a visit. Perhaps that's what he's referring to.
yeah,
There you are.
yeah,
Oh,
there,
travel from there. There you go. See.
yeah. Well, that. Okay. Well, I'm not sure that that's Chris's decision to make. It might be the club's interject.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
anyway, yeah, I'm sure he can do something. He might be able to share it. That would be.
Well, we did. We have invested in the VGR top changer. I don't know if you've seen that machine, but it uses the water injection scenario, but it also has a sand box on it that you can put the sand in and it'll draw the sand into the holes.
Oh, so it's something like the dry eject.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
similar,
Okay.
but a tractor-mounted machine. And the idea or the inspiration to invest in that machine was to perhaps help our fescue approaches and get some more sand incorporated in those, because as much as we try to match that firmness, we seem to always have a little bit of a difference between the fescue reaction to the bentgrass. And so the bentgrass will tend to, if you just land on the green, it'll bounce firmer than it will on the fescue. So the inspiration's to try and get a little bit more sand mixed through the fescue, but it's only a theory at this stage. But that's why we've invested in the machine to try and do that.
I have a question to go to an adjacent course. We were talking last month about the Sandringham golf course, which you maintain, and if I recall, it had a lot of thatch on it at one time.
Yes.
And that thatch, could you tell the story about what that course was like, and what your responsibilities are for that, and what the greens have been like?
Is that photo that I've shared that photo, I think, of the.
Mm-hmm. Let me find that photo.
But basically, just a short, brief history there. So that we took over managing or maintaining the course in 2010, and at that time the greens were predominantly power, but you could see some bent grass. So perhaps 80-20, 80% power, 20% bent grass, and they'd been. And it's a predominantly Pencross bent, it was, and so we were low inputs there, staff of 4, not the ability to do too much in the way of projects or anything. So we sort of analysed the greens and felt that they'd probably been watered more than they needed to be over the years. They'd certainly been fertilised more, and then it was on that cycle of high nitrogen, then disease, and then fungicide, and then high nitrogen again, and so quite an extensive organic matter layer built up. And so we just looked at them and sort of said, well, we need to dry them out. We need to back off our nitrogen, and we're just going to see what happens. And we managed those greens for 10 years and did not put any nitrogen on them whatsoever. So that's a public golf course, 75,000 rounds plus per annum. And we maintained those greens for 10 years with no nitrogen, virtually no fertility, to be honest. And what the outcome of that was in those photos, and this was one of the last areas, this is the putting green where everyone walks on and off. But after 5 years, we probably swung it back the other way. It was 80% bentgrass and 20% poa. And you can see from that photo how unwell the poa is, and the bentgrass is looking remarkably healthy and spreading. And that was what we saw over that period of time. And of course, with a low, you talk about low inputs, it was, it meant that you mowed them, a couple of times a week, because they weren't growing very, very rapidly. You were putting a lot less water, certainly no fertilizer, and a lot less fungicide on than the previous model. What was happening? Why were they behaving like that? I only assumed that it was the organic matter breaking down that was keeping the grass, giving it enough nutrition to keep itself going. And it was a really interesting exercise. So, that was what we saw there. But since then we've rebuilt the whole golf course with a OCM architects redesigned, and we've built something that's more of a more of a sandbelt look to it, with its bunkering and green style. We've put Sutton's Mix on the greens and fine fescue on the surrounds. They're the same as we have at Royal Melbourne. It's a $50 green fee. Give people the experience of a mini Royal Melbourne, I suppose, or a sandbelt golf course for the public to experience, and that's been our goal there. Still a work in progress, but we're enjoying the conditions that are being prepared there, and I think it's been a great facility now for the public golfer, and also for our high performance program for Golf Australia that use the practice facilities that we maintain as well. So, and that was an $18 million project that was involved building a facility that has three labs for the high performance golf program. It has putting, gymnasium, and all the admin and office areas for Golf Australia and the PGA of Australia as well. And then our sort of golf starting and cafe and that sort of thing. So that project's been really exciting one to do, and probably the only regret is that not being able to see those greens keep going for another 10 years and see how they would fare with still with no input of fertility.
Yeah, so the organic matter just kind of melted away as it broke down, and then the bent came to dominate. And you weren't doing interseeding with bent grass at all. It was just from the bent that was already there.
Yes.
So if you would have been interseeding, it's possible that it could have been a more dramatic or an almost complete overtaking of the POA, do you think?
Those photos are probably a little misleading, because that was the very last and probably the most stubborn area to see the transition. It was just that it was so obvious there. I just had to take the photo. But on the greens in general, it was a softer transition that sort of wasn't as lumpy and bumpy as that looks there. It was sort of a much softer transition from one to the other. So yeah, that's a little misleading, but it sort of very, very much shows how well it was working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that That is very cool. So I'm also struck by 75,000 rounds and no nitrogen. And then I'm curious about 75,000 rounds and Sutton's mix on the greens and fescue surrounds. How do those grasses stand up to that kind of traffic after the renovation?
Yeah, well, that was the concern, and we were a little uncertain about that. And now we need to be a little more friendly with our nitrogen applications, because they're new and they're built onto sort of just push up sand type green. So we've just got to keep the nitrogen there to keep them growing to manage the wear. So we can definitely see wear and tear, but we're just trying to keep the grass cover there with the minimum amount of nitrogen we can, and still conscious of not promoting power and things as well. So, but look, they're standing up to it. I think where we have difficulty with the fescue is in the areas that are wetter and have the traffic. So the site is probably not as good in terms of its sand consistency there. I would say it's 50% of the property is sand, and the other 50 is a heavier ground. So water can sit around in wet periods, and that's when the fescue then tends to check out and not enjoy those conditions. So that's where we're battling a little bit with the traffic and moisture. But where it's on drier, deeper sands, it's fine. It's handling it well. So.
Let's we've come to almost 90 minutes of this. You mentioned at the very start about managing the water or irrigation. So I wanted to ask you about that, how you do that to manage bentgrass versus POA, and how you maintain the firmness and the playability, with what role irrigation has with that. And then we'll answer any remaining questions. If anybody has questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll try to answer those. And then we'll sign off and get on with our days here, or we'll let people go to bed in another part of the world.
Yeah, so look, water's a big part of the firmness story, that's for sure. And what I invested heavily in here was, and I said this when I came to Royal Melbourne, it's about teaching greenkeeping skills to the people looking after the turf, and getting them to understand that it's much better to pull a hose out of the back of your cart than it is to turn on a sprinkler head. So and if you run that style of management, you better commit yourself to it 7 days a week. If you were in a Melbourne summer, when you get those very high temperatures, you've got to be committed to that, because it's quite easy to press the green button on the irrigation system and close the door and go home and relax over the weekend. But to run that drier hand watering style system, you've got to be onto it in those warmer temperatures. So we try to teach people about the importance of that, and how to hand water properly, and only water when we need to water. And that's a skill that takes a few years to accomplish, and even then we don't get it right. So it's one of the things I enjoy doing most in my job, and I don't do it as much as I would like to these days, is to getting on a hose and getting out there and watering the turf. But I think to get that firmness where your low drainage point will bounce the same as the higher areas. The only way you can do that is with hand watering. You can't turn on irrigation and water everything. You've got to just water around those areas often and just touch up the high spots. So yeah, we're very, very conscious of the importance of hand watering, and to the point where sometimes, dealing with a mixture of grasses in your green, which is really what the Sutton's mix is. You look down into it, you've got all sorts of different textured leaves, and there's different components to that, and they all behave differently. So you can have one part of that mix is a lot more drought tolerant than the other part. So you've just got to be careful you don't dry things out to the detriment of the density of the surface, because then it starts to get bumpy and you lose ground. And I've done that plenty of times. You run that knife edge of dry and firm and cooked turf. You run that every day in summer. So you just got to be careful you don't get overexcited with it, and that's over the years that's what happens. But in terms of getting a green to play the way we want it to play, and to favour the bentgrass over the poa, all those sorts of things, that watering part is critical. And I remember back at Metropolitan when I was there in 2009 summer, was a drought, quite a droughty summer and hot, and we had, I think, for January and February, we had something like 4 mil of rain for the whole 2 months, and hot temperatures, bushfires that year as well. I think we record. I'm just guessing a little bit here, but I think we only turned the irrigation on once over that summer, and we had a separate system for hand watering. And I think I'm right in saying that we used, say, just under 5 million litres of water to maintain the greens for the whole summer, and it was all hand watering. So, you can certainly be efficient with your water. You get a much better, firmness scenario, certainly favouring the bentgrass over the poa. So all the advantages of hand watering. It's a time commitment, and we now also try to apply that to the fescue as well. So again, you've got big areas of cool season grass that you've got to manage with hand watering. It's quite a time commitment.
So over 36 holes. How many staff would be dedicated to that on a January 20th day with, it's 36 degrees and a bit of a breeze?
Possibly 6 or 8 on each course.
Okay, so a few holes.
Not for the whole day, perhaps, but afternoon. Yep.
Okay. And do you use soil surfactants or wetting agents?
We have done, and we've tried a few, but we swung more to penetrants than anything now. So again, trying to not hold moisture in the profile, but keep it moving through. So more penetrants. I think we've, again, not proven with data, but just visually, since we've been using penetrants, we see certainly a firmer bounce. Often with the wetting agent, the old style wetting agents, you'd put them on and it would soften the surface for a while. Certainly worked well, letting the moisture in and holding it there, but would soften the surface for a period. So the more modern type, penetrant type wetting agents are where we've swung to, and I think that's been to the benefit of what we're trying to achieve.
So you regularly apply some type of surfactant? Yes,
so 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
Frequency.
Yeah, I've got blog posts about what wetting agents really do, and so I don't like the terminology like wetting agent, thinking that that's going to hold water, and penetrant, thinking that it's going to make water move. It's more that the water gets distributed more evenly in the soil. So when I say soil surfactant, I'm just meaning something that's going to have that effect of making water spread more evenly in the soil and allow the soil to be more easily re-wetted. Because there's just no data that shows that that different type of products actually hold water. Everything is anecdotal. So I interject here with my scientific feedback just to say I prefer the terminology of soil surfactant. And then you can choose which product is going to work best for your situation. And they all must work a little bit different, but I'm not sure that that a particular one is going to retain or push water through.
Well, I'm old enough to remember using dishwashing detergent for as our wetter.
Oh wow. Yeah,
So just
that
to break that
that'll
oil.
burn it a little bit.
Yeah, well, it worked. It breaks down that sort of oily coating and lets the water soak in. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. So,
Dawn, I think Dawn dishwashing liquid.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that.
Not that I'm promoting it.
So if anybody has any more questions, we're still here. We will answer them if you have any. Otherwise, we will close out the show. I certainly have enjoyed talking with you, Richard. This is fascinating, and I think not everywhere needs to have the kind of conditions that Royal Melbourne Golf Club produces. But I think a lot of people are interested in how those are produced, and some places do want to try to duplicate that. And what you're doing, which is, you know, some of it is the way Claude Crockford used to do it. The grass is certainly an old type of grass, and you're using these old school greenkeeping techniques that are a little bit different uh, than what we typically get taught in turf school or the way that Americans tend to manage grass. You remember that? Did Ben Crenshaw say that he talked with Claude Crockford, and or did Claude Crockford say that a lot about Americans trying to grow grass and Australians trying to keep it from growing? But I've heard it told as Ben Crenshaw tells that story that he learned that's what he heard from Claude Crockford.
You know, that he's been repeating what Claude had said to him. The other thing he said that was interesting recently in a podcast I heard him speak about when he played here in a tournament, and he was fascinated by the firmness and the dryness of the greens and the surfaces, and he said he wanted to make the point of to see what the greenkeepers did after play in terms of the watering the turf. And he watched them, and they came out with a hose and they spent 5 minutes and put some water around. This is on quite a warm day, 30-degree day. He goes, well, there you are. That's why they're firm and dry. They just put a little bit of hand water on, and then they go again the next day. So definitely a fair bit in that moisture management part of it. So
yeah, well, and it's also when Chris and Doug. I'll put a direct link to that show in the video description and in the show notes when I reshare this, so people can listen to that. Doug mentioned about grass growing better in soils that hold more water. And I think some of the fascination that people have with having a rapid saturated hydraulic conductivity, or we sometimes use the word infiltration rate, meaning that the water would just move right through the sands, makes it more difficult to have firm surfaces and makes it more difficult to grow good grass because you have to constantly be putting water on it. And I think you've mentioned that whiter sand that had a more uniform particle size that was on the greens before doesn't produce the type of surface that you want, and it would dry down faster, but that's actually problematic. So maybe the sand that you have that might have a very slow infiltration rate, but it might be holding some water down there, and then thanks to the hydroject, you can get roots down, and it allows this to work really well.
I think one of the things that show that is the sand belt bunkers and the sands and the way that sand behaves in a bunker, because um, you can get it to produce a firm, hard face that resists the ball penetrating in it. But in the bottom where you rake it, it becomes loose enough to be a good bunker sand. And those edges, the vertical edges around the greens, they stand up almost vertically, like it's almost like a concrete type scenario. And so many architects have come from all over the world to sort of study that on the sandbelt, not just at Royal Melbourne, but the sandbelt type bunkering. And it's so much to do with the sand and the characteristics of the sand being able to pack and form that sort of resistant face in a bunker, but yet in the bottom where it's loosened up, it's a great bunker sand. So I think the bunkers tell a bit of a story about how the sand behaves as well.
Yes, that those are beautiful. How do you, for anybody who hasn't seen, the green edge goes right to the bunker lip, and then it drops down into these deep bunkers. Do you spin the mowers right on the green to turn them, or you choose a good direction so you don't have to turn by the bunkers? How does that work?
No, just turn them on the edge, and it can. If you're mowing frequently, you probably sometimes would use something right on the bunker edge to just turn the mower on, like a turning board of some description. But in general, they cope with that. Okay.
So
Maybe a
you
little.
don't use turning boards on a daily basis, only for when you're mowing a lot?
Only on bunker edges that are under pressure, really.
Oh, okay.
On the fescue surround, they just turn them there generally. Tournaments, where you're cutting more often and multiple cuts and things, they probably come into play a bit more. But in general, no, just on the some of the bunker edges that are a bit more fragile in spots. So yeah.
That is excellent. Well, thank you so much, Richard. I really enjoyed talking with you about all this stuff and learning from you about this. And I think now there's going to be people that are able to watch or listen to this from around the world who might be surprised by some of these things, like basically not top dressing and still having surfaces that can be so firm. So, yeah, this is something that I'm learning about, and I appreciate you being so generous with your time and with your information to share that with me so I can learn more and to share with all of our audience here. So, thank
Oh,
you. Thank you so much.
well, thank you, Micah, for the invitation. I certainly enjoy talking about it, and I've enjoyed discussing it with you in recent times as well. I think the more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the more things become clear to you. And so I do enjoy talking about it and hearing other people's comments, and feedback's always important as well. And we're going to take Chris up on his offer to bring his Hydroject out for us as well. So.
Yeah, I think that would be that would be good. I maybe he could. I don't know. There was a comment earlier from LW50 says he does see a fair amount of hydrojects for sale in the U.S. on the second and third hand market. He says they seem unloved by most courses, maybe because of the relatively high maintenance requirement. But you guys must have some expertise at keeping these things running.
Yes, our mechanics are Hydroject experts, definitely.
Okay.
Uh, I think if I had greens that had a gravel layer in them, it wouldn't be the machine to use. I don't think, because you might correct me here from the science, but I feel like that they would be washing perhaps fines to the bottom of that profile if you're doing it regularly all the time. But I might be wrong there, but that's the feeling that I sort of had. Whereas in a deep sand profile, you don't have that sort of thinking or concern.
Very good. Okay, Richard, I we'll go ahead and sign off now. So, well, I'll end the stream. We can talk a little bit more if you are available.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed it. Thanks everyone for listening, and I will be back soon with more on the ATC Double Cut show, and we'll try to do some more ATC office hours so we can do these live streams also. Thanks everybody. Bye bye.